Tear gas was not used.
Gas released around 10:30 this morning, police calling it a chemical irritant to stop assault.
And so, from my perspective, the operation in Ottawa to dismantle the blockade from a policing perspective was in fact a success. Let's not forget, there was no loss of life. Nobody got hurt. Tear gas was not used. We did not have those ugly scenes of people with bloodied heads. And so from that perspective, the police operation to dismantle was a success.
Try to sort through my thoughts from what I saw today. And I just wanted to put this out to you because I don't know how else to express to you what I'm thinking. What I observed today was the breaking of a country. Canada truly has fallen. We have a fascist dictator, leader that has given powers out to squash people who do not agree with him and his government. The people doing his bidding are the very people that I call brothers and sisters. I did your job for 24 years, up until last December, on the street. The police officers that took part today in Ottawa, from all services, need to check your moral compass. I know your conscience inside of you was saying, this is wrong. I should not be doing this. You need to step off the line, all of you. You need to continue to be that person that stands up and protects the Canadian citizens. Those protesters in Ottawa were peaceful. They were loving. They were those folks that are your neighbors. You want to know why I know that? I was there. I was a peaceful protester. I spoke on that stage. I walked around for hours, both during the day and at night. What Trudeau has said in the lying mainstream media is all untrue. You are acting on lies. Your leadership is acting on lies. They are not upholding their oath to the people of Canada. I'm appealing to you as a police officer to not partake in what you know is wrong and unlawful. You are hurting other Canadians.
When governments do not protect their citizens' rights, everyone ends up paying. That's the lesson that I certainly hope that this settlement will lead to future governments understanding. You cannot systematically, repeatedly, deliberately ignore charter rights of any citizen.
Most of the time, dreaming dreams of a life of crime. In and out of trouble, he cheated and lied. But who'd have thought he joined the other side? He's in the riots amazing what a few weeks can do. Out in the car, out on the street, south of the river on the front line beat is in the riot squad. The water fight squad. The shoot on sight squad. Oh, Laura Ryan. Cracking heads, it was all a game. A finger was pointing, he got the blame. Back where he started, he ain't got a pound. Cue him with a salsa, used to kick around. Riot squad. They wanna fight squad. The shoot on sight squad. Follow Ryan. The riot squad. Yeah, the one fight squad. The riot squad. The shoot on sight squad. The riot squad.
Nobody got hurt. Tear gas was not used.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China, because their basic dictatorship.
This is outrageous. Where are the armed men who come in to take the protesters away? Where are they? This kind of behavior is never tolerated in Boracua. You shout like that, they put you in jail right away. No trial, no nothing.
Time to do some sketchy shit. Doo-dah, doo-dah, hope I get away with it. Oh, doo-dah day.
I mean, I was just aghast this weekend that, there's a bouncy castle and there's a hot tub. David, I wanted to go up there and poke that hot tub myself. And
talking with people who think differently from us is how we challenge ourselves.
Can you explain the reason why you won't participate or meet with them? I mean, you've attended rallies on the Hill in the past, including during a Black Lives Matter protest and others. Is there a reason that you can give as for why you will not discuss or have any negotiations with this particular group?
I have attended protests and rallies in the past when I agreed with the goals, when I supported the people expressing their concerns and their issues.
We are here out of love for our families, our communities, and our nation.
So is this what Canadians voted for?
But
Order à l'autre. Order à l'autre. The Public Order Emergency Commission is now in session. La commission sur l'état d'urgence est maintenant ouverte.
Okay, good morning, bonjour. So we're at the last day of the public hearings on the facts. There will be, of course, the public hearings on policy matters. Alors, c'est la dernière journée pour recevoir les faits pertinents. Et évidemment, il y aura la période de politique la semaine prochaine. So I think we're ready for the next witness, Commission Counsel.
Shantona Chaudhry for the Commission. Our next and final witness is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll take a few minutes. I'm not sure where the process is, a bit anticlimactic.
Should we take 5 minutes?
I think we'll take 5 minutes then and see, and you can come and get me when it is. Thank you.
The commission is in recess for 5 minutes. La commission en avait pour 5 minutes.
Go ahead. It's just a bit of a false start. So, nothing to do with your appearance. You're welcome to come in. Obviously, we're happy to get started.
Can the witness be sworn or affirmed?
Mr. Prime Minister, will you swear on a religious document or do you wish to affirm?
J'aimerais le faire sur la Bible, s'il vous plaît.
Pour les fins de procès verbal, s'il vous plaît, veuillez indiquer et ensuite épeler votre nom en entier.
Oui, j'affirme. Et Justin Trudeau, Justin-Trudeau.
Jurez-vous que le témoignage que vous allez rendre devant la commission sera la vérité, toute la vérité et rien que la vérité, que Dieu vous mène en aide?
Je l'affirme.
Merci.
Merci. Merci.
Just before we get started, as I understand it, as you heard, there will probably be some testimony in English and some in French. So please, if you need translation equipment, you should have it at hand. Okay.
Good morning, Prime Minister.
Morning.
Thank you for being here. So we'll start with the routine housekeeping. You recall being interviewed by Commission Counsel on September 9th of this year?
Yes.
Okay. And after that interview, Commission Counsel prepared a summary of your interview.
Yes.
For the record, we don't need to call it up, Mr. Clerk, but it's WTS.5084. And Prime Minister, you reviewed that summary and you can confirm that it's accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Okay, and I'll add there that, of course, it's a summary. It's not an exact transcript of your words, but it's a prepared summary, and we're all aware of that. So, Prime Minister, as you know, you are the final witness to testify before the Commission. So at this point, the Commission has heard a lot of evidence about the events of January and February leading up to your government's decision to declare a public order emergency on February 14th. But what we haven't heard yet is your perspective. So your own perspective, your viewpoint, both as the Prime Minister leading the country through these events and the decision maker in the government's ultimate decision to invoke the Emergencies Act for the first time in that act's history. So we have 2 hours together this morning, and I anticipate that the examination is going to proceed in 2 parts. The first part will consist of fairly specific questions taking you through the chronology of events, often with reference to documents that have been adduced before the commission, readouts of your own calls. And the second part will consist of some bigger picture questions, so addressing some of the key themes that have arisen out of these events and the government's response to it. So let's start with the chronology of events, and I'll warn you, we're going to fly through this pretty quickly. 2 hours is not a lot of time to fly through everything that happened between these days, but if ever you feel like you need to add in some narrative or explanation, please feel free to do so. So we'll start with just the pre-arrival days. So before the convoy arrived in Ottawa, we know that you learned the convoy was on its way a few days before, maybe around January 24th, and you were briefed on it by both officials from PCO and your own staff from PMO. Can you recall what your expectation was at that point? So you've been briefed, the convoy is on its way. What did you anticipate was going to happen?
Ben, on avait vu pendant les mois qui ont précédé un niveau de frustration et de dissatisfaction avec les politiques gouvernementales par rapport au mandat, par rapport à la vaccination. Et on avait entendu de la rhétorique assez corsée de la part de plusieurs personnes à travers le pays. C'était un reflet aussi de ce qu'on avait vu pendant la campagne électorale qui s'était passée 6 mois avant. Alors, de voir que ces groupes allaient venir manifester à Ottawa, on s'attendait un petit peu au genre de rhétorique et à l'intensité qu'on avait vue, mais on a régulièrement des manifestations à travers le pays. On est vigilant, on est attentif, mais on se prépare dans la mesure du possible.
Okay. Vous avez parlé de la campagne électorale. Pouvez-vous dire un peu plus sur ce sujet?
Bien, la campagne électorale avait été un moment où on a pu consulter les Canadiens directement sur les mesures qu'on voulait amener pour protéger la santé publique, c'est-à-dire spécifiquement des exigences de vaccination pour quiconque voulait embarquer dans un train ou dans un avion, ou bien travailler pour la fonction publique fédérale. Et c'était des gros enjeux, une grosse décision de limiter l'accès au transport fédéral comme ça. Donc, pour moi, c'était important que les Canadiens puissent se prononcer sur cet enjeu-là. C'est sûr qu'on le faisait ancré dans les recommandations de santé publique, dans le désir de garder les gens en santé, en sécurité, mais je pense que c'était tout à fait approprié qu'on ait des débats robustes à travers le pays sur ces enjeux-là. Et c'est exactement ce qu'on a eu pendant les élections. Il y avait plusieurs partis qui étaient en faveur de ce que nous, on proposait. Il y en avait d'autres qui étaient farouchement opposés. Et les Canadiens, pendant cette campagne électorale, ont pu se prononcer. Mais ce qu'on a aussi vu, et ce que moi et mon équipe et mes candidats ont vu en particulier, c'est un niveau de manifestation, de frustration et d'agression, au moins d'intensité d'émotion par rapport à cette campagne-là, par rapport à ce que nous proposions, qui était pire et plus intense que tout ce qu'on avait vécu dans d'autres campagnes électorales ou dans d'autres événements politiques. Donc, on voyait qu'il y avait une intensité potentielle qui était là pendant la campagne électorale, qu'on a vu à quelques reprises dans les mois qui ont suivi et qu'on soupçonnait s'en venait peut-être à Ottawa pour ce convoi.
Okay, so just to sum that up, and I'll switch back to English. I think we'll probably be switching back and forth a few times. You saw the protest coming and you've been briefed on it, and as you said, Ottawa is used to dealing with big protests, but there was maybe a hint that something could be a little bit different here. So there was a hint of worry there. And then, of course, we know that the convoy arrived started arriving on the 28th and then went into full swing on the 29th. What was that first weekend like when the convoy arrived from your point of view?
Well, first of all, one of the things that we noted in the run-up to the arrival was a bit of a disconnect between what the sort of political arms of my office were seeing and expecting from what we'd seen on social media, colored by our experiences from the campaign that was only a few months before, contrasted with the assurances by whether it was Ottawa Police Services or even the public service, that this was just a normal, quote unquote, style of protest that we see on the Hill fairly regularly. And there was already a little bit of worry that this might be a different brand of event than Canadians were used to seeing. And we certainly saw during the first weekend that the expectations that the police had said that they would simply go home, the ability to keep it under control was not exactly there.
Okay, and I think starting on that Sunday, you made a few calls to various MPs in your Ottawa caucus, sort of checking in and seeing how people were doing, because there was a level of concern there. So on that note, I'll ask Mr. Clerk to please pull up ssm.can.nsc402813. While that's being pulled up, it's a readout of a call that you had on Sunday, January 30th with Yasser Naqvi. So just for the benefit of everyone in the room, can you tell us who Yasser Naqvi is?
Yasser is the Member of Parliament for Ottawa Centre.
Okay, perfect. So if we can just scroll down to the text here, Mr. Clerk, there we go. So, hey Yasser, how are you, PM? How are you doing? And how are folks in the community? And Mr. Naqvi says, very dire. Community feels under siege. You can imagine number of trucks, rigs, honking. For them, it's a party, but they forget it's also a neighborhood, especially low-income families. I've been getting a lot of feedback. Also been in touch with Marco, that's Minister Menachino, Bill, I assume Minister Blair, and local officials, finding ways to make sure these folks are not part of residential streets. Tonight will be challenging. And you say, I feel so gutted for so many people who are just in such a difficult situation. It's not just disruption, but there's a lot of hateful rhetoric going on. Are you seeing some of that? And Mr. Naqvi says, it's unbelievable. The images that we see are hard to believe. Saw a life-size poster on a truck of Hitler and your name underneath. This is the kind of grossness our country is subject to. I have constituents being yelled at for wearing masks while out doing normal chores. There are all kinds of issues people are facing in the neighborhood. I don't know if they can sleep at night. And you then reply, there doesn't seem like much clarity on how long this will last. And then you refer to an incident at the Shepherd of Good Hope. And then finally, your last comment here is, I'm so sorry, my friend, this is just horrible. The RCMP is concerned, everyone's on eggshells. Having this going on in our nation's capital is just totally irresponsible. So to some extent, that's self-explanatory, but I'm wondering if you can help us a little bit in explaining the context of that call and what Mr. Naqvi was referring to and what you'd observed yourself.
Well, I dare say that citizens of Ottawa are used to political activity and protests on the Hill on a range of things. But this was present and in their daily lives and disrupting their weekend in a way that wasn't a usual political protest. From the intimidation and harassment of people for wearing masks to a very concerning story about folks disrupting the nearby homeless shelter and soup kitchen. There were indications that there was a level of disregard for others that unfortunately we had seen examples of during the election campaign. And it emphasized for me that this was the same kind of thing that we had seen, the intensity, the anger, the hateful rhetoric.
Okay. Moving on then, Mr. Clerk, to the next document, ssm.can.nsc402812. So, Prime Minister, this is moving on to the next day. So that would be Monday the 31st. I think at some point there was some hope or expectation that the convoy might disperse by Monday, but it didn't. And at that point, you have a call with Mayor Jim Watson of Ottawa. So we'll just look at a couple of things here. The initial reference is to a press conference you've done, and he tells you you hit it at the park, hit all the right notes, and then says these people had their time and need to move on. So he's and he's trying to get this across to the chief of police, that'd be Chief Slowly. So Mayor Watson is obviously very focused on putting an end to the protest if he can. Scrolling down then, that last bit, JW, that's Mayor Watson. Chief of Police said it's so volatile, but kept under control so far. Trucks are starting to leave, but the diehards chained themselves to this. It's unfortunate for people living in the neighborhood. Chief of Police spoke to Chief Lucky, and we need a few more sources. I think that probably means resources, and you say that's for sure. And then it goes on. He says, scroll a little more. We have to do this with a sense of balance. These guys are just looking for a fight. And your comment back on that, just scroll down a bit, Mr. Clerk, is the remainders will have no choice but to incite as a counterbalance. So we all have to be careful. Can you explain those last few comments and the balance and counterbalance you were referring to there?
Yeah. Can you scroll back up to okay, no, just keep both Jim's line and mine on the screen. There we go. Yeah, I mean, these calls were very much about me understanding what's happening from a local sense, and there was expression in this that there were some people who were more intense in the protests than others. Some were just along to be part of something that they agreed with. Others were really shaping it and driving it, and I think. I believe, I'm not entirely sure what I was saying there. I'm not sure the transcript is exactly right either, but it's enough. This sense that we didn't want to further provoke, but we need to be firm in standing up for people. We need to encourage people to leave, but if they see that the numbers are starting to dwindle, the ones who remain will be more intense. So there's a sense already that as we manage this, we have to be careful. We want to make sure that we support and protect people living in the city, that we're allowing for life to get to normal despite this protest, without inciting any reactions that amplify the thing further.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. The next one, Mr. Clerk, is ssm.can.nsc402814. So now we're at Wednesday, February 2nd, and this is a call that you have with Anita Vandenbeld. So again, can you tell us, Prime Minister, who Anita Vandenbeld is? Anita is a Member of Parliament for Ottawa, Nepean East, or I believe that's it. Anyway, she's just to the west of downtown. She's a longtime MP and a very strong community Member of Parliament, and she was expressing here just how the tone of and the tenor of this. What was going on in the neighborhoods and around people was worse and more hateful and different from anything she had seen before in a number of years as an MP, but a long time involved in political engagement. So you remember this call? Yes, I do, very much. Okay, so we'll just read through a little bit of what Ms. Vandenbeld said. Starting there, you say, I wanted to check in, how are you doing? She says, I really appreciate it. I'm torn, I'm scared, but I get really mad that I'm scared. Kids with autism, the noise, it's one of those things you feel like it's okay, well, it's awful. I'm not a stranger to volatile environments, but it's different because I know the sentiment is directed towards us, you particularly. There's this hate for liberals. And then after that, I do think it may deter some young women looking into politics. And I don't want anything to happen to one of us, God forbid you, before we start thinking about all of this. And then she speaks about constituents calling about what the PM is going to do about it. It's hard, and she says it's hard because I know it's not within your purview. People are frustrated and they just want somebody to do something to get the city back. And then she speaks about some other hateful messages that she's observed. And you say, it's about how you balance it again, being responsible and reasonable. So the part of this that I'd like you to speak to, Prime Minister, is where she says, a lot of constituents are calling me about what the PM, what the Prime Minister is going to do about this. And she then says, it's hard because I know it's not within your purview. So what does that refer to?
That actually refers to one of the challenges and things that we were struggling with from the early days of the pandemic, of the convoy occupation, which is that because they were very visibly most motivated to protest the federal government and federal government policies, even though many of the mandates they were actually vocally concerned about were provincial measures, but it was very clear that they had targeted Ottawa and the seat of our federal government deliberately, that it was a federal protest in a city that houses the capital. There is an impression and an expectation that therefore it's it's the federal government's responsibility to deal with it, to make sure that it goes away, to stop it. There is a general expectation, even by people who are longtime residents of Ottawa, that this is somehow like Washington, D.C., that is a separate enclave where the RCMP can give out traffic tickets, which they don't. But there is a blending of orders of government in protection of Parliament Hill and the precinct that led a lot of people to say, well, they're here, they're angry at the Prime Minister, they're disrupting my neighborhood. The federal government should really do something to get rid of these protesters or move them along or have them leave. Where we were continually explaining, as Anita said, it's not in our purview, the management of Wellington Street, of neighborhoods around, was the jurisdiction of the Ottawa Police Services. And if they needed support, the OPP and then the RCMP could be providing extra supports, but it was their jurisdiction. But of course, anyone who's involved in politics, you can be a federal MP walking through your riding and someone complains about garbage pickup. They don't want you to hear you say, oh no, that's not a federal issue, that's municipal. They say, thank you, I'll make sure we pass that message along and we'll try and see sure that gets fixed. The idea that I was saying, this is not a federal policing issue, this is not a federal issue, this occupation, this is something that Ottawa Police jurisdiction need to take care of. For a lot of people, sort of say, well, like, see, they're here because of the federal government, and the federal government is refusing to do anything about it. Was the kind of blending of narratives that we had to be really careful about.
I think we're going to come back to that when I start asking a bit about Ontario's initial response to all of this, but we're not quite there yet. So I'll take you a few more things, and then I'll ask you to pick up where you left off there. So far, we've been looking at some calls you've had with your own MPs from your caucus. The next one, Mr. Clerk, you can pull it up. It's ssm.can407738. Is a call that you had with, on February 3rd, Candace Bergen, who I believe had just become Leader of the Opposition in the House. I confess I was yesterday years old when I learned that, but I now know. Okay, so this is a call you then have on Wednesday, February 3rd with Ms. Bergen. And do you recall this? Do you remember this call, Prime Minister?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and can you tell us what inspired that call, or
It was mostly a congratulatory call when someone becomes leader of a political party that sits opposite us in the House. I tend to reach out and have a bit of a personal conversation. I usually ask after family, see how they're adjusting to it, to maybe give some recommendations about trying to get enough sleep. But I try and keep it a human introductory call, even though I had engaged with her many times in the House over the years as an MP. When she became leader, I wanted to reach out and establish that personal contact. Of course, it was all happening in the context of this occupation going on, so that was part of the discussion, but primarily it was a congratulatory call.
Okay. Get enough sleep is always good advice. Mr. Clerk, can we scroll down a little bit? Here we see, there we go. Okay, so this is the part of the conversation that you start talking about the security situation in Ottawa. You say, the second set of briefing would be security situation in Ottawa right now. Obviously of real concern, and we have lots of disagreement on causes and path forward. I would certainly like to make sure you're getting briefings on safety and the situation and have you at least fully informed. Hopefully we're all going to be able to make sure Canada's democracy continues to run and our institutions remain strong, and quite frankly, the citizens of Ottawa get back to their regular lives. Scroll down again, please, to the next page, Mr. Clerk. So Ms. Bergen says, absolutely, I agree. I'm sure you weren't following question period today, but that's what I'd like to see some resolution. You're right, we disagree on some things, but I would agree with you. The goal is to let's find a way for people to head back home and clear things up in Ottawa. We do want the same things. If you have some ideas or some things you think could be done, extending an olive branch is one way of putting it. We'd love to be able to work together to make that happen. All of us, and you say in reply, all of us need to focus on getting the temperature down, and getting people back to normal lives. Let's ensure there are discussions on that, and there may be opportunities to work together. Some of them, and I think you're referring to the protesters there, have jammed themselves into a corner, and their acts are non-starters. We have our democracy and our institutions. That is well worth defending. There are ways we can get beyond this. I'm worried about setting a precedent where if anyone wants something, they can set up a blockade on Wellington Street. People need to be heard, and that's part of our democracy, and getting that balance right. And Ms. Bergen says she agrees with everything you've said. I think that you do have to be cautious, and as PM, you don't want to set a bad precedent. I'm sure you're talking and coming up with some ideas, and then she offers to help. So the part of that I'd like you to elaborate on is, it appears there that you're talking, and I take it the olive branch is a suggestion of some engagement with the protesters, some talking to in whatever capacity that would end up being. So what comes out of this conversation that you have with Ms. Bergen, and what was in your mind at the time?
I say, we have ensure there are discussions on that. Let's ensure there are discussions on that was very much, let's make sure as political parties we keep talking about it and figuring out how we can work together. And then, some of their asks are non-starters, like overturning the results of the election that we just had. But in terms of responding to their demands or legitimizing them by engaging, I'm highlighting that I'm worried about setting a precedent that a blockade on Wellington Street can lead to changing public policy. People need to be heard, but we need to get that balance right. And then she agreed that I need to be cautious, and I don't want to set any bad precedents.
Okay, so fairly self-explanatory. There's a willingness to discuss, but you were concerned about setting a precedent where a blockade could equal a change in public policy. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think we have a robust functioning democracy, and public protests are an important part of making sure we're getting messages out there, and Canadians are getting messages out there and highlighting how they feel about various issues. But using protests to demand changes to public policy is something that I think is worrisome.
Okay. So thank you, Mr.
Although,
Clerk.
sorry, to a certain
No,
extent.
please go on.
Protests, if you're out protesting that the government is, shutting down a safe injection site or something, you are asking for changes in public policy. But there is a difference between occupations and saying we're not going until this is changed in a way that is massively disruptive and potentially dangerous, versus just saying, yeah, we're protesting because we want public policy to change, and we're trying to convince people to get enough of them that politicians will listen to enough people saying, okay, I'm going to lose votes if I don't change this. That's the usual way protests can be effective in our democracies.
Okay, that's a fair point of distinction. Thank you. Mr. Clerk, the next document is ssm.can.nsc 402819. So, Prime Minister, we're now heading into the second weekend of the protests, so Saturday, February 3rd, and our understanding is that the protests intensified again with more trucks coming into Ottawa. And on that day, on the Saturday, you have a call with the Governor General, Mary Simon. Do you remember that call?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so here is the readout of it, and we'll just go through some of, or quite a bit of actually, what was said on that call. So again, there's the introduction, and you say it's been stressful, not so much for me personally. The Governor General says, yes, they seem reluctant to give it up also, makes it challenging. And you say, yep, people blame the feds, but many of the mandates are not us. And for the police, well, we don't direct them. Trying to get this resolved as peacefully as possible. Want them to find a way to save face, but they can't shut down our democracy. Sorry, they're trying to pull you into this also. They just don't understand the institutions. And then the Governor General asked to go further on that. Actually, I'll stop there. Do you remember what you're referring to in that paragraph there?
Yeah, that was I believe it was a memorandum of understanding that some groups within, or some group within the protesters had declared that what they wanted was to empower the Senate to work with the Governor General to create a provisional government appoint a government committee that would change public policy, and displayed a lack of understanding of how our democracy and our institutions actually work.
Okay.
But I mean, it also meant she was getting bombarded. The Rideau Hall, which is filled with good people giving out medals to worthy Canadians, were bombarded constantly by demands that she fire the Prime Minister, and in a very, very aggressive way. And that's what I was referring to as tough for her and tough for her team.
Understood. And is that what prompted this call?
Could have been part of it, but I also speak regularly with the Governor General just to check in, and obviously this was something that was worthwhile checking in on. But yes, that was probably the reason.
Fair enough. Okay, so then she asked if there's any sense on how it will be resolved, and you say something, and then now they're starting to do that. Bill Blair has handled a lot in the past, and we know we've heard a lot from Bill Blair at the commission as well. This is not a protest, more an occupation, hard to diffuse. It will take time, being very careful to not try to fix something we don't have the tools for. And then there's some discussion of the funding. Can we scroll down a bit, Mr. Clerk? Onto the next page, please. And then the Governor General says, yeah, there's some of the senior staff getting a lot of hateful emails, asking for the Governor General to fire the Prime Minister and to create these crazy things. It's difficult to receive these things. They made a website in my name saying stuff. Have to let it slide off our backs, and then you discuss the security situation. So is that where you were just referring to, Prime Minister?
Yes.
And the sort of bombardment? Okay. So just generally speaking, before we move on, what was your sense of where things were at on that second weekend?
The first weekend caught everyone by surprise. Through the second weekend, I think I mentioned it in referring to Bill Blair, talking with the local police with his own expertise and background, talking about things that can be done to try to de-escalate, to start putting an end to this, understanding that it can't happen overnight, but that there are things that should be done. There was an expectation or a hope that on that second weekend, we would see a decrease in activity and a dwindling. Instead, we saw a surge on that second weekend, and things that we had heard that the police were going to start doing this or doing that, and we're going to be able to respond, didn't seem to be materializing. There was a sense that the occupation was just continuing full swing without any real control or even plan to end it. And I know from conversations with MPs and others that the citizens of Ottawa were quite frantic about having to go through a second weekend of horns and disruptions and being yelled at for wearing masks and not being able to go to their neighborhood stores and seeing the Rideau Centre shut down and all these different things that were really problematic. And people were starting to get pretty upset that this was 2 full weekends that they were being massively disrupted by. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Take that one down. So speaking of getting a little upset, the next topic I want to address with you is Ontario's initial response to the protest in those early weeks. So one theme that's emerged from the evidence we've heard, and we've seen several references to it in the documents, is your government's frustration and your own frustration with what might be characterized as a certain reluctance on the part of Ontario to engage, especially in the tripartite tables that Minister Blair, I think, had put together. So, Mr. Clerk, can you pull up ssm.can.nsc 402837? This is the readout from a call that you had, Prime Minister, with Mayor Jim Watson on February 8th. Excuse me. Okay, so just keep scrolling a bit, Mr. Clerk. Past the key takeaways onto page 2. So just to stop there, give a bit of situation. So Mayor Watson here brings up the expression whack-a-mole, which we've heard several times in the commission. It's fighting a losing battle. We don't have enough police. And you reply that, well, that's entirely right. I know we're looking carefully at that. We're looking at the resourcing. And then you say on the Ottawa policing side, you've seen, as I have, some concerns on how things were handled from the beginning. And then you ask about Mayor Watson's relationship with the police chief and how they're working together. And you observe that there are moments where Mayor Watson is saying one thing and the chief is saying another, and ask if there's anything you can do about that. So just briefly before we go on, can you comment on that a little bit and the Ottawa policing situation to the extent that you were briefed on and aware of it?
One of the things we'd said from the very beginning to the RCMP and to the Commissioner of the RCMP and to government in general, that if there was anything we could do to support the Ottawa Police Services in what they were doing, if we had resources or abilities, because there is a federal presence in this capital city, we should do it. That we were there to be helpful. I instructed Brenda to try and do whatever she could to send support to the city of Ottawa. What we got back, or what we had heard, as I recall, were different numbers from what the mayor said Ottawa needed to what the police chief was saying they needed. And the one thing that the commissioner made clear to me was they needed to know that if they were deploying resources, that they were going to be appropriately used, that there was a plan for that. And we see it sometimes in requests for assistance across the country, where someone will say, "We need 20,000 police officers," or we need the military to come in with 1,000 troops, or we need this or that in RFAs. And part of our due diligence is, okay, what do you need them for? What are you going to be doing them for? Because, for example, if you're sending in military, as we did in Hurricane Fiona, to help clear power lines, as was necessary in Atlantic Canada, in no situation do military members engage in policing activity. And there was a sense that maybe they could be directing traffic. And we have to make sure, no, they're not police. Military isn't there to play police roles. And that's why we always have questions that, okay, we're going to send resources, but we need to know how they're going to be deployed. And there wasn't always that clarity around what the plan was, how many they actually needed, how they were being used, and how they were, where they were going to be best deployed.
Okay. Just keep scrolling down, please, Mr. Clerk. I'll tell you when to stop. Keep going, please. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I missed it. There we go. So Mayor Watson says, I'm going to ask after this phone call whether the federal government will live up to its commitment. We need boots on the ground very shortly. It's not dying down. It took over Metcalfe Street, blocked all of it. And you reply, listen, yes, you can say the federal government will be there with more resources. But again, the thing that frustrates me, and everyone is conflated, but Doug Ford has been hiding from his responsibility on it for political reasons, as you highlighted. And I suppose it's important that we don't let them get away from that. We intend to support you on that. And Mayor Watson replies, if they keep dragging their feet, I'm happy to call them out on it. It would be nice if we got something firmed up with the federal government to shame them. Ford didn't even make an effort to come and see what's going on. So can I just ask you, Prime Minister, to comment a bit on the politics that are going on there?
Well, first of all, when I say everyone is, I believe is conflating, it was conflating, a protest of federal issues with a federal responsibility to do the policing that would dissipate that protest. So that was, a little bit of an interplay that there was a sense that in the initial phases of the protest, the Ontario government was happy for the perception to be out there that this was a City of Ottawa issue and a federal government issue, and that as a province, they really didn't have a responsibility or a jurisdiction to play in there. It was an unpleasant situation. There were bad headlines. I was getting grumbled at by citizens of Ottawa every day because the federal government wasn't dealing with it. I can understand that provincial politicians who were being overlooked in the complaints everyone had about why this wasn't getting resolved would say, you know what, let's not poke our noses into this, and people will continue criticizing those people that help. I'm fairly certain that behind the scenes, the OPP was engaged with Ottawa Police Services and was providing supports as we were as a federal government. But I think at the political level, there was probably a decision to continue to stay back a little bit and let us wear it a little bit. What we had seen during the pandemic and during other crises is when the three orders of government are able to work seamlessly together. Not only does it deliver better results and better coordination, but it actually reassures citizens to see that people who are not always politically aligned at the highest levels can roll up their sleeves and work for the benefit of citizens. And that's certainly something that I've always tried to do, and I've been able to do with Premier Ford on many, many issues. But at this point in the evolution of the occupation, that wasn't something that we were able to do. And so, yes, there was a bit of frustration about it.
Okay, well, and we'll see that the very next day you had a call with Premier Ford, and just in the narrative, what was going on at this point is, in addition to Ottawa, and there were a few things, as we know, going on across the country, but by this time, the 7th, 8th, 9th, the Ambassador Bridge blockade had really heated up and was in full swing, and that seemed to be a turning point in several ways, but certainly for Ontario's participation in all of this. So, Mr. Clerk, if you can take that document down, please, and bring up ssm.can.nsc 402845. So point for advocacy, to make a long story short, this is a call where it seems that you and Premier Ford are engaging and deciding to work together to solve this problem at this point. We can skip over the first, oh, here we go, the last part of that first paragraph. So PDF, Premier Doug Ford. He says, what we can recommend and what we can work together on is I've asked our AG, our Attorney General, to look at legal ways to give police more tools and exhaust legal remedies because the police are a little shy and I can't direct them. So that's one area we can focus on. We can't take their polar licenses. We checked that. We can shut down their fuel consumption and cordon off highways. That's where we're at. And
Might be operator licenses. I don't.
yeah, probably not polar, but operator licenses. Let's go with that. So then you reply, first of all, they're not a legal protest. They're occupying a municipal street and are not legally parked. You shouldn't need more tools, legal tools. They're barricading the Ontario economy and doing millions of dollars of damage a day and harming people's lives. At a time we're trying to draw in investments, a whole bunch of people are looking at this and saying, we can't even clear up a protest on a bridge. So just stopping there, Prime Minister, do you remember what you were referring to when you start talking about you shouldn't need more tools?
I mean, that whole question around legality or illegality of the protest, they didn't have a permit to protest. They not certainly as long as they had. They were illegally parked. They were engaged in disruptive activities. There are any number of municipal and provincial bylaw infractions and legal infractions that they were engaged in by just being there. And there is a sense that, and this was based on an earlier conversation I had with Bill Blair about how one proceeds in this, is you can enforce small things as a way of keeping the situation under control and creating boundaries and balances and moving towards it. It's an approach. The issue here was that there were things that they could do and things that I know were tried that they realized were unsafe for them to do. There are stories of police officers getting swarmed there when they tried to arrest someone with a jerry can filled with gasoline. There was a sense that, giving out simple tickets wasn't really having much of an impact as they did that. And taking stronger measures was going to be resisted and met with significant resistance. But these are things that if they feel they didn't have the resources to enforce a prohibition on bringing in jerry cans or a prohibition of parking on the approach to the Ambassador Bridge, well, let us give you more resources to do that. Between the OPP and the RCMP, we should be able to get the numbers up in a way that could lead for an ability to use those existing tools on the books. That was very much where our thinking was at that point. Like how many more police officers, how much more resources do you need to get a plan? And if there was a concern around, we can't get those police allocated to us from other jurisdictions unless there is a clear plan, well, we'll send you planners. We'll help get those people there so you can establish a plan that will allow itself to be deployed. There was really a sense that there was more things that could be done, and he seemed to be agreeing.
Okay, and that's actually what you end up saying in the part you can't see right now of that, the next page, the paragraph.
I am at least consistent.
Exactly. So you say the Bridges and Tunnels Act means the federal government has something, I can't read that anymore, but the federal government has responsibility over the bridge and border. So there's a role for us to play. We're happy to play it, but nobody can get on the bridge because they're on municipal land being blocked. So we'll give you whatever resources you need. The police of jurisdiction need to do their job. If they're saying they can't do it because they don't have enough officers or equipment, we need to remove that excuse as soon as possible so they can do their work and we can prevent Ontario from becoming a laughingstock. Mr. Clerk, just scroll down to the last page, please. We'll skip over. There's some jurisdictional discussions going on there. And then just at the top of that page, please, Mr. Clerk. So this is the sort of the conclusion of the conversation. You say, what are the next steps? You've said the OPP are going in. Are they keeping you apprised? And do they understand the urgency? They can't talk this out for 3 weeks. They need to act immediately. And I'm assuming there the concern of acting immediately is brought about by the situation on Ambassador Bridge, which we heard a lot about from the Deputy Prime Minister yesterday. Premier Ford replies they'll act, but without directing them, it's hard to describe their game plan. They'll have a plan, unlike Ottawa, where they didn't have a plan. I'll get briefed tomorrow from the Solicitor General, would keep you updated. This is critical. I hear you. I'll be up their ass with a wire brush. Then the next, you say, yes, that's one of the quotable quotes of the commission. There have been a few, that's one. The next, your reply there is, well, we're there with resources. Bill Blair will coordinate on our side. You can reach out to LeBlanc, Minister LeBlanc or me. You and I need to work together on this. People will be reassured by the two of us working together. We need to demonstrate this is not a place of lawlessness. Okay, we can take that down. Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
I will say, though, that
sorry.
they can't talk this out for 3 weeks. They need to act immediately. I wasn't just talking about the Ambassador Bridge. I was talking about Ottawa as well. I was talking about the fact that this simply can't continue to be stretched out this way. But when I say they need to act immediately, obviously, I'm not directing the Premier to direct police. We know all the limitations that we have, but there was an expectation that this was a situation that was going on for too long. And as Doug pointed out a couple of paragraphs later, there is a sense that that the police of jurisdiction had lost control and wasn't able to control the situation.
Okay, that's fair. Yes, I took the document down before we got to Ottawa, but that's right. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. That one come down now. So shifting gears away from Ontario, we understand that there's a lot of concern coming at the federal government from the United States as well. And again, the Deputy Prime Minister yesterday spoke about the many conversations she was having with stakeholders in the US officials, Brian Deese in particular. And we understand that on, I believe, February 11th, you ended up having a phone call with President Biden. Mr. Clerk, we'll just pull up the readout of that call. It's PB.can6057. Okay, just scroll down to the next page, please. So, maybe that's there. It's got to be somewhere. Keep scrolling until you see a readout. But in the oh no, there it is, I think. In any event, Prime Minister, can you tell us, just the readout doesn't actually say that much, so can you tell us about your recollection of that call?
There were sort of two goals I had in that call. The first one was to reassure him that despite the disruptions to trade and real impacts on both sides of the border, which were economic, yes, but were also people to people. We knew from the pandemic that thousands of healthcare workers cross the Ambassador Bridge every day from Canada to go work in Detroit in their hospitals. There are real meaningful connections across that crossing that were being disrupted in meaningful ways, and I wanted to reassure President Biden that Canada was going to be able to solve for this, and that we were going to continue to be a reliable partner for trade and for people-to-people ties, and a safe neighbor. That was sort of in response to his concerns around disruptions to activities on both sides of the border because of the blockage. But the second thing I wanted to talk about was just sort of the general context, the fact that the 911 center being overwhelmed in Ottawa a couple of days before happened from American calls, that there was a significant amount of amplification from certain sectors of the American politicosphere. And there was also a significant amount of money flowing and support for these occupation activities in Canada that were coming from people in the United States sympathetic to that cause and opposed to both he and I in our public health policies, but also in our general policies.
Okay. And would you say that President Biden shared your level of concern about the situation?
No. I think I was much more concerned about the blockage to the lives and the disruption and the potential security concerns. I think he was very concerned, but I don't think anyone was more concerned than me.
Okay, fair enough. It was happening on your side of the border, so that makes sense. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. That's it for that one. So this sort of brings us to a pretty critical time in the narrative of what happened in February. So we're building to a bit of a crescendo around that time, the 10th, the 11th. And we've heard from the clerk of the Privy Council that on February 9th, she advised you to convene the incident response group. And the first meeting of the incident response group was then on February 10th. So we have heard quite a bit about the different cabinet committees and what the IRG is, but I'm wondering if you can tell us from your perspective, sitting as Prime Minister and chair of these committees, what it means to convene an IRG and how it differs and what it gives you, what advantage it has versus other structures.
Regular cabinet committees are chaired by members of cabinet and feature various cabinet members sitting around the table, assisted by their directors, their deputy ministers. But they are discussions amongst cabinet ministers on a particular issue that will then go to full cabinet. That's what most committees are. The IRG is a special committee, special in that it is chaired by me. It doesn't have a permanent membership because we deal with incidents that require or are important for the federal government to respond to. These could be floods or hurricanes. The most recent IRGs I've had have been on the situation in Haiti and how Canada can respond and support. We had them around. Have them around all sorts of different things, depending on what they are needed for. We pick the areas of expertise we want around the table. But differently from most committees, these are meetings in which the officials sit around the table and are not just expected to participate, they actually lead the discussions. Whether it's deputy ministers or heads of agencies, the commissioner of the RCMP, the director of CSIS, what have you, they are giving direct reports. Ministers are usually, if not always, there as well. But if they speak at all, it's at the very end to add a little bit of color or further input. IRGs are all about making sure that the government as a whole is hearing directly, that I am hearing directly from all these different agencies and all these different inputs into whatever incident we're looking at. And then we establish a plan or we move forward on that. It's actually a decision-making body. We can make determinations about what we do next, but that frame is fairly unique amongst our committee structure.
So it kind of it collapses that layer between the officials and the ministers a bit, so gives
we hear
access?
Directly from the ministers, which is sometimes something that cabinet ministers who are used to getting briefed by their officials and then briefing their colleagues takes a little bit of getting used to. When we have a different IRG on a different subject with new ministers who aren't usually at IRGs, it always is a little adjustment for them that, no, we're hearing from their deputy minister, not from them. It's about informing us, but it's also about making sure that everyone is on the same page. One of the challenges in any government is the siloing that happens. Something that happens in public safety doesn't necessarily get connected to transport, doesn't necessarily get connected as organically as we'd like to immigration. And various things like that. So making sure that everyone's around the table, getting on the same page in terms of what's happening with this incident that we're looking at and what we're going to do about it. And there's usually here are the taskings we're going to do. And let's check back in a few days and see how we've done and see where we are again. IRGs rarely happen on a sort of a one-off. There's usually a series